What's going on, everybody? This is your man Abe-Unit, reporting live from the DMV. But you know what? That's enough for me. Today on the Abe-Unit Show, I have a special guest in the building. And we're going to start off with a quick intro before we dive too deep into the show. Let's go!
Hello, my name is Teddy Fikre, and this is the Abe-Unit Show.
Mr. Teddy Fikre, Congressional candidate, MBA from Johns Hopkins University, a poet, a voice for the voiceless. We'll get into all of that, but first, it's time for the warm-up. Are you ready?
Yes, sir. Bring it on. Let's go.
What was your first job?
My first job, actually, let's see. That I always kind of vacillate between two answers for that. My first time I made money was when I came to America, let's see here, in 82. There was a big snowstorm later that winter. I made $100 shoveling snow in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
So that was my, I guess, a part-time job, you know.
Yeah.
But my first real job, I think, was at the age of 13. I was a dishwasher at a Chinese restaurant.
Okay. How do you start your day?
Prayer, and then after that, I go on social media. I'm trying to get rid of that, just to see what's the latest things. But above and beyond, just to be in gratitude and just to pray and look forward to a productive day.
Advice you would give to your young self?
Focus on doing the right thing, and not so much on what the outcome is, especially when it comes to. So there was a time I was going through a breakup, a pretty bad breakup, and I opened up the Bible one day, and I landed on Jeremiah. I forgot exactly which section it was, but it's the part that talks about, those who put their faith in people are like a tree that's planted by the desert. But if you put your faith in God, you're like a tree that's planted by the water. I didn't get it at that time. So I put a lot of focus on what the perception of people have, not necessarily of me, but not necessarily, instead of just saying I'm going to do the right thing, I focus on what pleases God and leave everything else to be.
Oh, amen to that. A politician you admire the most?
Ooh, that's almost mutually exclusive terms. Now, I would say maybe Bobby Kennedy.
Bobby Kennedy.
So yeah, Bobby Kennedy, and maybe Teddy Roosevelt too.
Teddy Roosevelt. Something you're not good at but would love to be great at?
Singing. And it's good. And also, it's good stuff.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. I just said I'm a great clapper, not so much with the shoulders.
What's your favorite food?
Oh, kitfo and doulettes.
Kitfo. Oh, okay.
And sushi as well. But yeah, doulettes is I think doulette might be my favorite of all time.
A place you've traveled to that you would not go back to?
I don't think I have any, to be honest with you. I love traveling. I don't think I've had one bad experience while traveling. I said, "Oh my God,
That's the political answer.
No, I would say I was kind of disappointed in Key West up to a point because I looked forward to going there for such a long time.
Yeah.
And I finally went there a year and a half ago, and it wasn't the town was beautiful, but the beach is like it was all coral reef, and you scratch up your feet walking into it. So I was a little disappointed with the beach.
Okay. If you received $1 million grant to use for this city any way you wanted, what would you do with it and why?
It would be somehow to make sure that. So one of the things I really wanted to do, and it goes back to my own experiences of 2015 when I went through 2 years of homelessness, is to build a foundation where people could come in who are homeless and they get a second chance at life.
If you could have an unlimited supply of one thing, what would it be?
Love.
That's fair. And lastly, what is your favorite thing about yourself?
I think my resiliency. I've been through a lot in life. Who hasn't, I guess, but there's just been one gut punch after the other. But my faith in God and just ability to just refuse to give up. And a lot of that too is from my dad. My dad was just a hard worker. He never gave up. Came here in 82. We were working 3-4 jobs at a time. That's the one thing I inherited from him above anything else. So resiliency.
All right, so the thing that stood out to me about your candidacy immediately was when I found out you're running as an independent candidate, which I really appreciate for two reasons. One, you used to identify as a Democrat, right, and you were a huge supporter of Obama. And secondly, because I would imagine it's a harder hill to climb, right, in terms of getting on that political map, right? So what made you turn away from the Democratic Party, one, the Democratic Party? And then two, why run as an independent knowing that it is the tougher battle to
Sure.
fight?
Well, so I guess let me start with the first one. What made me turn away? So in 2008, I was a huge fan, follower of Obama. In fact, that was kind of my entry point into American politics. I've always been watching it from the sidelines, reading about it.
Mm.
But when I said, okay, I'm going to go all in, it was 2008. So I went to 16 states to get him elected. I was at the Democratic National Convention in Denver. Even the one 4 years later in Charlotte, I went there as well to cover it. I was really invested. But then I sat back and started observing his policies, right? And it took a while for the bloom to come off the flower because I kept rationalizing.
Mhm.
It's amazing how much you can rationalize these things.
Right.
So, he bails out the bankers and basically tells homeowners to go take a walk. I rationalize that. More wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and new wars in Yemen and so on and so forth, and Somalia. I rationalize that too. Policies that could have helped out workers in the middle class and the poor. He does nothing. I'm like, well, it's the Republicans' fault. It's just one act of rationalizing after the other. But eventually I was like, wait a minute. There's no difference.
Right.
And when I realized that, and then shortly thereafter, I became homeless for 2 years, right? And what I used to rail against in theory, right, the injustices of the world, I was working, making six figures at Buzan Hamilton, living in a luxury condo. So I know about injustice. I see it, right? But to actually experience it, to be with the victims of this bankrupt system that enriches a few and impoverishes so billions around the world, I saw firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I realized there's no difference between these two political parties. They're both corporate owned.
Mm-hmm.
What Democrats do in terms of what Republicans do in terms of monetary policies, fiscal policies with tax cuts, Democrats do with monetary policies in terms of like quantitative easing, lowering interest rates. It's the same thing. This is just a different side of the same coin.
Right.
So once I realized that, then I knew for me, I could never go back into the partisan lane. I never thought I was going to run for office, to be honest with you. But I became an independent journalist. I spent years rallying against both parties.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, it was actually not too long ago, I was like, wait a minute, to be against is not an answer.
Mm.
What am I for?
You need
Right?
solutions.
Yeah. I need to, and a vision, right? It's easy to be against something. I could rail against the status quo all day long, but what is the alternative? That's when I decided I think I might run for office. But then when I ran for office, I knew I can't do it as a Democrat or Republican, and the part of me that was kind of like the pragmatist said, wait a minute, to be an independent, it's almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
But then I had that honest conversation with myself, like, okay, it might be impossible, but some of the greatest changes of humankind were always done when something was impossible. So I think we're at an inflection point in American history where literally the status quo cannot remain. The economy is every day is crumbling. Gas prices over $5 a gallon. To buy food, you almost have to get a credit check to buy food. And so it's not sustainable. And so I think Americans, especially by the time August and September come around, are going to look for something different. And then the question is, who do you want to represent you, and who actually represents you or resembles your life? Well, the current incumbent, he's going to win come Tuesday, Don Beyer, is worth $124 million, money that he inherited from his dad. He's former car dealership executive, it's just he's endemic of what's wrong with our politics, where money, not merit, determines whether or not somebody is going to win office. That is exactly what's wrong with American our governance. Money dictates everything. When the founders of this country, when they envisioned a House of Representatives or a Congress, it was supposed to be about working people representing working people. Mm-hmm. That's not what we have now. We have millionaires working for billionaires. That's not working for any one of us, and that's why I decided to run for office as an independent. It's not to become a career politician. It's to make a difference.
Right.
You can't make a difference by joining the very same system that is turning this whole country and the world apart in the process.
Yeah. And I know You touched on this a little bit, but you're a highly accomplished IT project manager, right? On a business consultant with an MBA from Johns Hopkins University. You have the resume to make comfortable six figures and fly under the radar.
Right.
What is the source of the determination to speak to the voiceless?
Sure. Well, it's always been. I've always had that. Even when I was back then, when I was working at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a very exclusive consulting company.
Yeah.
There was kind of like the whole, juggling act of 5 days a week working at the Pentagon, and then 2 days a week weekends going out and protesting against the Iraq War, or protesting against some injustice. I've always felt the need to speak up for the voiceless. And maybe, I get that from my mom, who was always, may she rest in peace, was always, speaking out against the injustice of the world. It might even go back, so, I'm a seventh generation descendant of Asitojos. His story, he actually declared war on the royalty at that time in order to defend the impoverished masses.
Right.
So it's just been a part and parcel of who I am.
It's in the bloodline.
It kind of is, and I'm not talking about in terms of royalty. The only royalty is God.
Right.
Every one of us on this earth are the same. We're equal. I don't believe in one above the other, and in fact, that's what's wrong with this world. And if we are royal, it's not the title that makes us royal. It's the heart and the what we give to others and of ourselves to others that makes us royal. So. But yeah, to that end, I don't envision my life as saying, well, I want to be a millionaire or a billionaire. I want to make a difference. It's always been like that. Yeah. Some of my biggest heroes have always been like that. And so that's just who I am at the core. The idea of me succeeding while people that I care about, whether that's my family, my neighbors, or strangers that I see on the sidewalks struggling, I can't abide that. So that's just the kind of the core of who I am.
Yeah. And you've touched on homelessness. This is something that you've experienced in 2015. You lose your job at Booz Allen. And you didn't know where your next meal was coming from. You bounce around from states to states, and then you find yourself in that farm in Colorado.
Right.
You were living and eating for free, but it came with a lot of labor. How has that experience shaped the person that you are today, not even just politically, but just as a person?
Yeah, it was beautiful, to be honest. In hindsight, it was hard.
Right, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was the hardest thing in my life. But I found purpose there that I could not find when I was climbing the corporate ladder. I found more joy, I guess, if you want to call it that, or gratitude, not joy.
Did that take a while? Because I would imagine there's a level of pride that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Out of the first 2 years, the first year I was bitter. Indignant, angry, just everything. When you lose everything, and it's funny. When that time comes for you, it's like Jonah and the whale, right? You're by yourself. You're in the belly of the beast by yourself. Nobody comes. Friends, everyone kind of disappears. And then that makes you even more bitter, right? But that's the test. That's the cross that we have to bear. So that first year I was very bitter, but then after that, I remember I used to see a chaplain every week, every Monday at Harvest Farm. So he gave me a notebook and a pen. He's like, Teddy, I know you'd love to write. Start writing. At first I was like, what do you want me to write about? what is there to write about? Yeah. These goats and pigs and cows on this farm? There's nothing. My life is over, But he insisted. So I started writing. I wrote my name the first day.
Okay.
Next day I wrote a sentence. The following day I wrote a paragraph, and within 3 weeks I wrote a book. Right, and that's when things started turning for me, because I started being grateful for the small things in life. Yeah. What I was not grateful for when I was when I became went from being a senior consultant at Booz Allen to an associate. When I finally crossed over the six-figure threshold, when I got this luxury apartment in Falls Church. The more I got, the more I wanted. Yeah. It took losing everything, for me to actually find gratitude and purpose too. So that to this day, I learned more in 2 years of homelessness than I ever did at Johns Hopkins. I learned more about our common humanity. And that's where, for me, I've really got over this idea of us versus them, because that's happening in Ethiopia. There is based on ethnicity. What's happening here is based on race, gender, orientation,
Every single
everything.
thing that they can find to divide.
Exactly, and it is intentional, because it's the same way that I guess if you go down the biblical sense, the same way that the devil was able to deceive Adam and Eve through the ego, right? It's the same thing. We when somebody preys on the ego and convinces us that we're different than others, then we give in our hands to the very same chains that end up oppressing us.
Yeah. What was it that allowed you to see it now that you were homeless versus when you were living in this nice luxury apartment? You noticed it at that time, but it was harder to connect with it.
Right. I think the trappings of material possessions, right? Because you're so focused on getting more. And also, I'm not saying that I've had an easy life, right? Of course, I've been through a lot of painful things. My dad passed away in front of me effectively in front of me. He had lung cancer. And the last breath that he took was, before he was got onto the ventilator and went to a coma, was in front of me. I saw it happen in front of me. My mom struggled with depression a lot. There's been a lot of challenges in life. But yet still, in terms of the actual experiencing hardship, right? My dad was working all the time. He provided for us. So it's not like, I was forced to go to sleep at night hungry at night, I had a roof over my head. I went to George Mason, had a good career. So, like the hardship of economic uncertainty, not knowing where the next meal is going to come from. I never experienced that. My dad struggled with that because he didn't. He was working all the time to make sure that didn't happen to us. So that level of when hardship is not a part and parcel of your life, wisdom becomes lacking in a way, right? The greatest wisdom is the one that you earn through hardship, through walking a hard life. And so going through that 2-year experience, instead of things being in theory, it became reality. I've always cared about homelessness, for example, but it was an abstraction almost. Because when you see homeless people, there's a part of you that kind of checks out. You can't invest yourself. If you pay attention to everything, you're gonna drown in misery. But when you find yourself in it, though, it changes you, And so I think it was that. It was just the proximity to pain and experience it firsthand instead of just kind of reading about it or even watching while I'm driving by in my air-conditioned car.
Yeah. No, that's fair. All right, speaking of cars, I think we need to talk about gas prices that are absolutely insane. Not only that, but we have families struggling to get formula for their babies. We have students graduating from schools with close to 6 figures, if not 6 figures, and working minimum wage jobs. There are a lot of theories floating around as to why these things are happening, but I'm actually glad to have you in here. If you can touch on the whys, why are these things happening? Are they supposed to be? And is it cyclical? Is it not?
But let's just discount one theory, which is just almost a conspiracy theory. It's not Putin, right? This idea that this thing just started just last year or even a couple of months ago. It's a complete
Ukraine situation.
Yeah, exactly. It has nothing to do with that. This has been going on at least for the past 14 years, but really longer than that. It's consolidation of power, consolidation of markets, consolidation of money, the source of money into the hands of a few. And what that does, when you have monopolies on this scale, it creates there's two byproducts of that, or two outcomes of that. One, there's a downward pressure on wages, right? When there's less competition for workers, companies could pay less, right? So when you have, like for example, in the baby formula sector, you have 3 companies that have more than 90% market share. Well, who are they going to? They could almost literally pick and choose how much the wages go down because of that. Like for example, gas stations. It's not necessarily the price pressure point is not necessarily at the gas stations. It's at the refineries like Exxon, Mobil, BP. You have only a handful of players, and without competition, then you could just price gouge, and that's what they're doing. But on top of that, inflation, we've been told, is driven by consumer demand. That's not what's happening. The reason why there's inflation now is because you have 14 years of this thing called quantitative easing, where they're flooding the markets with cash, right, to artificially inflate the market, the Wall Street, or the corporation, the corporate profit, and by doing that, they're also incentivizing people to go to equities instead of savings, right? That's hurting consumers as well. And on top of that, because the never before in the history of this country has the federal government literally purchased debt, equity, and bonds from corporations. The very essence of what capitalism is supposed to be, that at least the one of Adam Smith, is no outside influences. Corporations can either survive or die based on the value that they provide to consumers. Now the government is stepping in and keeping these companies afloat artificially. Right. So really what happened is 2008, the global economy almost died. It's pretty much died. What they've been doing for 14 years is keeping the body alive. It's in a coma. We have a dead body, basically, right?
So this has been a fake resurrection.
It has been, exactly. It's been 14 years of being, feeding tube. Feeding tube going from government to quote-unquote private companies, right? Or public companies, which is really their private interest. So now we're seeing the end of that because you can't maintain that forever. So this is 14 years of the musical chair. The music is about to stop. So we're about to see potentially 2008 play out, except this time there could be nothing that could step in to save, to resuscitate it. So it's scary times, and if you believe in God, start praying. This year's bad. We're being hit with everything at one time. It almost feels like there's a spiritual essence to these things.
Right.
I've studied history for a very long time. I've never seen or read about a period where so many things are just happening at once. So maybe this is the fever. And so sadly, though, the same way that I kind of walked away from structures than politics, it's when you hit the bottom. And I hope that we don't get there, but it seems like humanity needs to hit the bottom and have the bottom drop out underneath us, and then at some point we'll say, why are we fighting each other? It's not about that. What we need is compassion and empathy towards one another, not to have antipathy and collectively judging people that have nothing to do with our if somebody is in Mississippi and has a different, a white guy in Mississippi has a different frame of mind than I do, he's not sitting at the policy table.
Right.
He's not the one that's perpetuating policies that are hurting humanity, So why am I bashing him?
Right.
We're in the same boat together, and hopefully
they've done such a good job of making us think
right
we're against each other, and while they go do the real work.
Yeah, let me tell you, when it comes to that country club, they don't see color. The only color they see is green, money.
Right.
They don't care about politics. They care about protecting their money. They know where their interest is at. We need to get to that level of thinking. Get beyond this narrow lane of tribalism and look at the wide scale of human suffering and realize it's all interconnected.
Let's talk Alexandria. What is the biggest issue that is affecting Alexandria currently?
I think so. I've talked to over 1,500 people. Collected, actually, it's 1,452 that I turned in.
Okay. And you just needed 1,000.
Right. But I couldn't stop at 1,000 because you'll never know. You never know what percentage of those people maybe not registered to vote or they moved. And so I just don't want to take any chances. But one of a couple of things that came up. One, surprisingly so, was about the state of the sewer systems, for example, in Del Rey and the Old Town area. It's really bad. Education is huge. Parents are for some reason, they're very frustrated with the. And I thought Alexandria and Arlington in this area was, in terms of education, middle school, high school, elementary, was up there in terms of the quality of it. But a lot of parents are very frustrated.
So is it curriculum or is it more the quality of the actual?
I think it's just more of the state of children in schools. There's increasing violence. Just the level of safety that kids are feeling, the state of mental health and within the preteens and teens is horrific. Yeah. So that's just parents are just seeing how their kids are coming home and kind of bearing the burdens of these things, and they're really frustrated about that. Yeah. But on a broader scale, the issues that are impacting people here in Alexandria, Arlington, South Fairfax, same thing that's impacting all Americans on a whole. It's the number one issue is the economy.
Yeah.
It's unsustainable. And now they're debating about whether or not it's a recession. Who cares whether or not it's a recession? Ronald Reagan was once said, "It's a recession when your neighbor gets fired. It's a depression when you get fired." Right? It's all relative. It doesn't matter. I don't need a label.
Yeah.
To
I just know I'm hurting.
Yeah, exactly. And I make a pretty good living now. Thank God. I'm nowhere near where I was at 7 years ago. But yet and still. If I miss 2 paychecks, I'm right back to being in trouble again.
Yeah.
And that's the vast majority of Americans. The net savings of Americans is zero. Everyone's 1 to 2 missed paychecks away. Even you make 6 figures, you miss 2 paychecks and see what happens.
Yeah.
So it's that level of anxiety. It's not, and it takes a toll. And I think part of the reason why parents are feeling frustrated about the state of schools too is it's all kind of tied in together. When both parents are working and still not able to really save enough to have a good quality of life, then they're not available for their kids. Well, when the kids feel like their parents are not available, then that creates that's why depression, anxiety, and even attempted suicides. I mean, Jesus, every day, over 3,700 kids in high school try to commit suicide. Mm-hmm. It's astounding that this is not the number one issue in America. The state of our kids, the future of any country, of any society is the children. Yet here we are, from the time they're born, the food that they're being fed, toxic. The information that they're consuming, toxic. The violence, graphic nature of shows that are aimed at them.
Yeah.
The commercials that just normalize eating junk food. I saw the other day.
Almost by design.
Yeah,
right?
of course it is. Yeah. Well, the design is money. The
Right.
design is to profit at the expense of humanity, and kids are very susceptible to these things. So then we get surprised when they do something bad. So that's the issue. We need to focus. There's an African saying that it takes a village to raise kids. Mm-hmm. We're doing the complete opposite. They're withdrawing.
We're letting TV raise the kids.
Yeah, and you see where this is headed. That I think that's the number one thing for people in Alexandria, Arlington. It's the economy, the state of our kids, and just the runaway cost of everything.
Yeah. That is a huge issue, and it seems like such a huge thing to tackle. But you personally, how will you be a part of this solution, or how will you try to attack this issue?
I think the number one way to resolve this is to take power away from DC and give it to the communities that we live, right? We keep outsourcing everything to DC. We keep outsourcing everything to corporations like Amazon and Walmart. And what that does, by derivative, is it destroys local economies. So we're literally indenting ourselves to these huge multinational globalist endeavors at the cost of ourselves. And so what we need to do is which is why I mentioned in the beginning about why I appreciate what Teddy Roosevelt did. He did something that very few politicians, if any, would do these days. He took on the trust, the big trust like the J.P. Morgans of the world and the Carnegies of the world, and he broke up the big trusts, the monopolies. We need to break up these monopolies in the name of humanity. So the only way you could reverse this, effectuate any change, is to break these multinational corporations up and have small businesses that live and work within the communities where they live. And so that's my number one message when it comes to the economy, about even social justice. Because there is no social justice without economic justice. Let's say the Congress is evenly divided come the election season and for the next term. I will hold out. Every time I would refuse to sign anything or vote for anything unless it meets the interest of workers, small businesses, and the poor. The other aspect of it is, being in Congress gives a megaphone. Right now, I'm just a lone individual saying these things. But if I'm in Congress saying these things, then it draws more attention, right?
The bigger platform.
Yeah, exactly. Bigger platform would mean bigger constituencies And you could then actually amplify this message even on a bigger level. And I've talked to a lot of people. There's people that big time Bernie supporters, big time Trump supporters, and everything in between. I don't put labels on them. I just tell them what my ideas are. Yeah. They love it. I cannot find one person that says I disagree with that.
Yeah.
So that's the problem.
We're blinded by the D's and the R's.
Right. The gang.
And the color,
Yeah. It's like a gang, isn't it? It's just like a gang.
It really is.
And so we need to liberate ourselves from these gang mentalities and actually focus on solutions.
Yeah. And I'm glad you touched on small businesses. And if you can expand a little bit on how small businesses will be affected under your leadership.
I think affected in a good way. Keep in mind, I'm not running to be president, right? So it's just ideas that I'm proffering. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is, look, one of the things I'm proposing, for example, I know it's going to sound like a radical idea, but what we need is a radical idea right now, is to make taxes for people that are making less than a certain threshold voluntary, right? If Jeff Bezos could pay essentially almost zero, if Amazon pays zero in taxes, why should we be compelled, right? Now, I know from personal experience, when I was in Colorado, there was a restaurant called Foco Cafe. You might have heard of it.
Yeah.
They didn't charge prices, right? People paid according to their abilities.
Okay.
And they were making a lot of money. When you give the people the option to pay, right? Because they want to do something good versus forcing them to pay, they overpay. There actually has been studies to this effect. And those who can't, won't. It evens out eventually, right? So why are you compelling people to pay 33% in taxes? And the top tax rate for these billionaires is 15%? And most of them don't even pay that?
Yeah.
That's deeply immoral.
And it's real, and I hear you speak on this, and it's clear that you care about the people. You have the passion and determination to help solve our problems as a community. But I just want to know, how do you plan to involve the residents in the decision-making process in our town?
Sure. I mean, it's outreach at all times. That's why I decided to get every signature myself. If I was not able to gather 1,000 signatures or 1,400, then I had no business running. So that was a litmus test for myself. So I did that. I went out there. Every day I was getting 30, 40, 50 signatures a day. Right? So, and what I realized is that initially felt overwhelming. But after the second, third day, I realized I love talking to these people. Like, this is one of my passions. I was able to talk to somebody for 4 or 5 minutes, and I would talk to them in a way that's completely different. Because I did not talk to them like I was a politician. I was talking to them like a regular human being, and talking about, listening to their issues, the ideas that I have. They would ask me questions. I would tell them, I was like, I feel like I'm in Iowa during a presidential primary or election season. So that level of engagement is what we need. Yeah. Right now there's almost like a firewall between politicians and the people that they're supposed to serve, and they don't know our pain in that way. Yeah. So when we go there, when I go, when I'm on the ground with people, even I pump my own gas. I don't need to get my gas pumped from me, right? So I pump gas. Now there's somebody right there, and we start up a small conversation. And when you do that, conversations are healing in that way. They effectuate change.
People want to be heard, right?
Yeah, that's all it is. Man, people are so angry right now because they feel like nobody's paying attention to them. Yeah. And then they lash out. If you give. Let me tell you a quick story. When I was in South Carolina, the first place I went to when I was homeless was in South Carolina. And one day, I saw like this white guy with a bald head, and I knew he kept looking at me a certain way. I was like, so
this ain't good.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was mad. I was bitter at that time. So I was almost like, I hope he said something to me. And I was like that angry, first couple of days. So by the fourth or fifth day, I was smoking, back then I was smoking a cigarette. And I saw him looking for a cigarette butts to smoke. I felt so bad for him, So I offered him a cigarette. He was shocked. So he sits down next to the bench I was sitting at, and we just start talking. And I tell him about, the stuff I've been through in life, the hardships I've seen, all that kind of stuff, And we talk for like 20 minutes. Mostly it's just me talking to him about me. Yeah. What I was doing in that exact moment was I was humanizing myself to him.
It wasn't just color at that point.
Right. And at the end, he says, I have never talked to a black guy before. I used to be in the KKK. He said the reason he hated black people was because his sister used to date black guys, and he hated them for that. He said he apologized. You know, that's what conversations do.
I know that you're a man of faith. I enjoy seeing the scriptures you post on IG. You haven't really been shy talking about Jesus on your platform. How does your faith play a part, not only in your political life, but just your life in general?
Sure. I mean, as you mentioned, I'm Christian by faith, but really I'm not religious per se, because I've also been to a mosque, for example. I've been to a synagogue. For me, God is everywhere. And I don't believe in imposing my views. I believe in sharing as a testimony. And in that way, I think my biggest hero is, in fact, Jesus for that reason. And I don't say this as a political answer, but really as a spiritual from the heart, because what he did, he stood up against the powerful and stood for the least amongst us. And they offered him to be king. He rebuked it. He didn't want any title. He was the greatest of us all, but he walked with the least of us all. There is a beauty in that which I cannot describe. You know, man, it almost gets me emotional when I think about these things. But he fed people. He walked with the people. I used to always say that the greatest power that Jesus had was not with his hands; it was with his feet, because he was walking with people. You know, you want to help someone that's struggling. Don't preach to them. Don't wave your finger at them. Don't even give. It's not even about money. It's the time that you spend walking with them. So for me, that's why my faith informs me. During my darkest time, the light of God has always found me. And so, you know, would I go to Congress, and I'm not running to be America's priest,
right,
or reverend, you know? And what we could do is I could share with someone the struggles I've been through and the testimonies that I have. But it's not to convince them.
Yeah.
Because you plant a seed, and whether or not that seed grows today, tomorrow, 50 years from now, it's not up to me. You know, that's the person's.
Let God water the seed.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not the water. I'm not the water nor the waterer. You know, I just do my part and leave everything else to God. So that's what I believe in.
Any final thoughts before we get out of here? Anything that we haven't covered that you want to get off your chest?
No, I really appreciate it. These conversations. One of the things I said is that I appreciate small businesses for a lot of reasons. But the main one is because there's authenticity, like you're on the ground. So I prefer coming here versus being invited to MSNBC, for example, you know, because we can have these authentic conversations, not meant to, for the sake of clicks and for the sake of getting more ad revenue for promotions, but to actually have real conversations about issues that matter to most Americans. So I really appreciate that. And you're doing a great job in terms of reaching out to people. This is what we need. Journalism that's about authenticity, not about just, trying to get headlines that get the most attention. But
gotcha question.
Right, yeah. You could have done that, and I could have, I would have been able to handle that, but you came at it from a level of authenticity, and that's what's missing. And so hopefully much success to you, and keep pushing ahead.
Oh, I definitely appreciate the love.